Daemon Targaryen stood at the prow of the makeshift flagship he had claimed for his own. The wind whipped back his silver-gold hair, and salt spray clung to the black scales of his armor. The Stepstones stretched out behind him, a scattering of rocky islands so often blood-stained that even the gulls circled high, wary of the turmoil below. His fleet was modest, forged from the battered remnants of victories won and alliances coerced. Yet to Daemon's eyes it was enough, a beginning befitting his ambition. He could smell the tang of war in the air, like ozone before a thunderstorm, and the thrill of it made his pulse pound. He lifted Dark Sister, its Valyrian steel glinting in the bright midday sun. A hush fell across the men arrayed on the deck around him. These were sellswords from Myr, Tyrosh, and Lys, even a few wandering knights of Westeros who had sworn fealty to gold more than any liege. They watched Daemon now, waiting. He knew their sort. If he showed the slightest flicker of weakness, they would devour him. But he was not weak. He was Targaryen. That morning, a small council of his captains had pressed him to become what they called the Master of the Stepstones. A petty king, a pirate lord, anything that might formalize his rule and attract more coin and more warriors. He had listened in silence as they drank cheap ale and spat their words across a sea-stained map. They wanted a crowned figurehead, a man or woman in shining armor whose brow sported some circlet, any circlet, that would lend their endeavor a grandeur beyond mercenary ambitions. It was easier to recruit under a banner than a sellswords contract. The idea made sense, but Daemon had refused to speak then, simply letting them argue. Now, as the gulls cawed overhead and the waves slapped the hull, he spoke. His voice carried across the water as if the seas themselves quieted to listen. "Hear me," he said, letting the sword rest against the wooden deck at his feet. "You want a king to lead you. Fine. I am Daemon Targaryen, blood of the dragon, prince of the city, rightful heir to the Iron Throne after my brother's line. Yet my brother sits in King's Landing, blind to the chance before him. He will not make war for these isles. He sits on that throne of swords and dithers." His tone grew sharper, edged with scorn. "I will not dither. These islands are mine by right of conquest. And if it is a king you need to bow to, then so be it." There in the open deck, surrounded by rogues, pirates, exiled knights, and lost sellswords, he placed a small gold band, crudely hammered into the shape of a crown, upon his head. The metal glimmered in the sun, as bold and brash as his grin. "I crown myself Daemon of House Targaryen," he proclaimed, "King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. Swear your swords to me, and I shall give you wealth and glory beyond imagining. Betray me, and I will give you only fire and blood." For a moment, the men watched him in stunned silence. Then they roared their approval. Oars thumped the sides of hulls in a cacophony of savage applause. On distant decks, men raised tankards and hollered oaths. Ravens, already perched at the edges of this new court, took flight with tidings for the free cities and beyond. Daemon, wearing that crude crown, felt the old Targaryen fire burn in his veins. He saw the reflection in the eyes of those around him. Here was a man who could lead them to fortune and legend. In that moment, Daemon Targaryen's ambition crystallized. He would be more than a self-styled king of the Stepstones. He would use this vantage point to force King Viserys' hand, to command the respect he deserved in Westeros. Let the realm tremble at the sound of his name. Far to the north, in King's Landing, the Red Keep bustled with routine. Lords swore fealty, maesters penned letters, and King Viserys I Targaryen endured the tedium of governance. Seated upon the Iron Throne, Viserys fidgeted with a scroll from the Master of Coin detailing the cost of new shipbuilding projects. He was a man more at ease at feasts and hunts than dealing with the unyielding realpolitik of the realm. Yet he tried to do well to maintain the Targaryen peace. When a panting messenger stumbled into the throne room that afternoon, the lords assembled gave him only a brief glance. Urgent messages happened often in King's Landing, though seldom with any real consequence. Viserys settled his kind gaze on the young man. "Speak," he commanded gently. "Sire," gasped the messenger. "Your brother, Prince Daemon, he..." The man swallowed hard. He has crowned himself king of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. A hush fell upon the gathered lords, as if the air were snatched from the throne room. Queen Alicent, standing at Viserys' side, felt her hand clench around the folds of her green gown. The tension in the hall thickened. King Viserys breathed out, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the letter in his hand drift to the floor. Daemon had always tested him, but this was brazen beyond measure. And though Viserys' temper rarely burned, it began to spark now. A king in the Stepstones. What madness was Daemon conjuring? How many men does he have? Viserys asked. And how fares Lord Corlys Velaryon in this? Corlys had been Daemon's ally in earlier campaigns in the Stepstones, but the king was uncertain how far that alliance went. The messenger shook his head. The sea snake's intentions are unclear, your grace, but the ravens say Daemon has rallied hundreds, if not thousands of sellswords. He is fortifying positions on islands stretching between Westeros and Essos, and he has begun sending letters to the free cities, offering trade pacts if they recognize him. An uneasy murmur spread around the throne room. This was no mere pirate raid. If Daemon gained legitimacy from Essos, shipping lanes could shift, fortunes could be disrupted. And who knew what alliances might form? Viserys pressed his lips into a thin line. He was a man who hated the idea of war. He had worked for years to keep the realm peaceful, to keep House Targaryen unchallenged. Now Daemon's rash act threatened to provoke conflict with the free cities, or force them to respond in kind. It could disrupt trade for Westeros, anger the lords who relied on it, and provoke the crown into a war. The Stepstones were, after all, strategically crucial to controlling shipping in the Narrow Sea. The king knew that a direct challenge was certain if Daemon's claim went unanswered. But Daemon was his brother, for all his flaws. Viserys set aside the messenger with a weary wave. "Summon the council," he commanded. "Let us see how we might contain this conflict." Word spread quickly throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Some lords and knights at first laughed at Daemon's new title, calling him a pretender who would be undone by crabs and storms. But others, those who knew the prince's relentless will and the might of a dragon rider, took it very seriously indeed. Caraxes, the blood Wyrm, had been glimpsed in the skies above the Stepstones. Daemon and his knights secured island after island, chain by chain, linking them into a formidable territory. The small garrisons that once languished on those rocks found themselves dominated by Targaryen cunning and Sellsword steel. In the blackness of midnight, on a craggy island once held by pirates of Myr, Daemon sat enthroned in a half-ruined hall. Torchlight flickered against damp stone walls. The court that had gathered around him was a chaotic mix of outcasts and opportunists. Yet among them stood several proud figures. Knights from Westeros who found life under Daemon's rule to be an exciting prospect, especially with the promise of gold. And at Daemon's side was a messenger from Tyrosh bearing expensive gifts. "King of the Stepstones," said the Tyroshi envoy, bowing. "I bring warm tidings from the Archon of Tyrosh. He welcomes your rise, for it disrupts certain shipping monopolies of Lys and Myr. The Archon offers a gift of pearls in hope of further friendship." Daemon smirked, taking the coffer from the envoy and letting the pearls spill into his gloved hand. Tyrosh was trying to buy him. He saw that plainly enough. But the fact they would attempt to do so meant recognition that Daemon's power was no mere fancy. If Tyrosh was willing to court him, others would follow. "You may tell your Archon," Daemon said, "that the Stepstones are open for trade, for those who understand loyalty." His eyes flicked across the dingy hall, drawing the attention of every half-drunken captain. "I will keep these seas safe. No pirates shall stand while I rule. Tyrosh may expect a reduction in raiders if they deal fairly with me." The envoy bowed again, gratitude etched on his face. Soon, Daemon dismissed him with a casual gesture, turning his attention to a battered table near the foot of his makeshift throne. It held a map of the Stepstones and the coasts of both Westeros and Essos. Pinpricks marked recent conquests. Tiny black dragon sigils hammered into the wood. Daemon's brow furrowed. This new kingdom was a tenuous chain of islands. Holding them against constant threat from pirates and potential enemies in Essos would be no small feat. In the back of his mind, he wondered how his brother would respond. Viserys was no warrior, but he had the power of the Iron Throne behind him. The Lords Paramount of Westeros and the royal treasury dwarfed any force Daemon could raise. The question was how far the king would go to stop him. Daemon had staked his claim, yes, but he was not blind. He knew the risk. If Westeros turned all its might upon the Stepstones, it could crush him. But that would cost Viserys. If the realm was forced into a costly war at sea, if trade was halted, the crown would suffer. Perhaps Viserys would want to avoid such a conflict, letting Daemon remain a nuisance as long as the problem did not threaten the realm's stability. Yet Daemon also saw a grander design. As king of the Stepstones, he could serve as a buffer, a bulwark against the rising powers in the free cities, especially if those cities turned on one another. Westeros might come to value him. Even if they never recognized him formally, he would gain respect and fear. And fear, more than any scrap of parchment, could act as a shield. Still, the notion of forcing his brother's hand tickled Daemon's pride. It was not enough merely to carve out a petty kingdom. He wanted to change the shape of the entire board. He wanted to show his worth, and if King Viserys refused to see it, then perhaps the realm itself would. Within a fortnight, ravens flew from the Stepstones not just to Tyrosh, but also to Bravos, Pentos, and even Volantis. Daemon offered fair trade routes, reduced piracy, and the might of a Targaryen dragon patrolling the waters, in exchange for recognition of his crown. Some responses came quickly, others in secret, promising gold if Daemon would hamper their city-state rivals. Daemon had no intention of becoming a Sellsword king, at least not openly, but there was benefit in playing them against each other. Meanwhile, far across the sea in King's Landing, conflict brewed in the small council. Ser Otto Hightower, the hand of the king, urged swift action. "Your grace," he insisted. "Your brother's folly grows by the day. He strengthens alliances across the narrow sea, forging pacts with unscrupulous men. If we allow him to grow unchecked, soon he will hold a stranglehold over trade, able to choke the crown at will." Queen Alicent, Otto's daughter, sat near King Viserys, her green eyes filled with concern. "If Daemon disrupts trade, it is the small folk who will suffer most," she said softly, appealing to Viserys' sense of responsibility. Seated at the table was Rhaenyra Targaryen, the king's declared heir, who had once shared a bond of closeness with Daemon. She listened silently. The flickering torches cast dancing shadows across her tense expression. "My brother is rash," Viserys said slowly, "but he is no fool. He knows we can muster more men, more ships, more swords. War would see him undone in time. Not without cost. Cut in Lord Beesbury, the master of coin. A war at sea is costly. If the crown empties its coffers for a naval engagement in the Stepstones, we risk turmoil at home. We would need to raise new taxes, your grace." "That would not be popular," murmured Grand Maester Mellos, wiping sweat from his brow. "The Dornish might seize the opportunity to stir trouble, or the Ironborn might raid the western coasts if the royal fleet is occupied in the narrow sea. The realm's peace is fragile." Ser Otto's mouth tightened. "Then are we to let Daemon declare himself a king, unchallenged? That sets a dire precedent, your grace." Viserys sighed. Every path before him held danger. He glanced at Rhaenyra, who said nothing. In truth, her thoughts roiled. She remembered Daemon's attentions, his scorn for courtly life, his swaggering arrogance. But she also remembered the intense loyalty he once showed her, how he had protected her in subtle ways. There was a small flicker of something within her, worry, perhaps, or admiration for his boldness. She hesitated to speak ill of him in a council that already hated him. "We must respond," the king said at last, "but not with an all-out war. Let us begin by strengthening our own naval forces. I will dispatch envoys to the Stepstones demanding Daemon abandon this madness and return to King's Landing. Should he refuse, we will apply pressure. If that fails, we shall see." So began the tense dance of letters and ravens, each side maneuvering to avoid open conflict while simultaneously preparing for war. Daemon fortified his islands. King Viserys built up the royal fleet with the support of House Velaryon, whose own ships remained formidable. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, found himself in a complicated position. He had once allied with Daemon to push out the crab feeder from the Stepstones, but now he served on the king's small council as master of ships. He remained outwardly loyal to Viserys, yet his admiration for Daemon's boldness had not entirely faded. The question on every courtier's tongue was, would the realm break into open conflict over the Stepstones? Many prayed the tension would subside. They underestimated Daemon Targaryen's hunger for power. They also underestimated the readiness of certain free cities to exploit the situation. Across the narrow sea, in Lys, the Magisters cursed Daemon's new reign. For years, the Lyseni had profited from the pirate havens in the Stepstones, covertly supporting them to disrupt rival shipping routes. Now Daemon was clearing out pirates and forging direct alliances with Tyrosh. In Myr, certain factions raged about the new balance of power. They threatened to raise their own Sellsword armies to reclaim the Stepstones, or at least topple this false king. Within months of Daemon's coronation, the first real test came. Myrish corsairs, backed quietly by Magisters from Myr, launched a raid on one of the smaller islands Daemon had claimed. Fires lit the night sky, and the reek of burning wood and flesh choked the beaches. Daemon, incensed, led a counterattack at dawn with car axes shrieking overhead. The Myrish corsairs, strong though they were, had no answer for dragonfire. Daemon burned their ships where they anchored. The survivors who crawled onto the sands found themselves surrounded by Daemon's spearmen. "Show them the cost of defiance," Daemon ordered, and he did. Heads were spiked along the shoreline, a ghastly welcome for those who might test the new king's wrath. Word spread across the seas in the hush of horror and awe. This was not a man to be trifled with. Yet the violence in the Stepstones was exactly the spark Myr needed to press for open conflict. Not wanting Tyrosh to gain a powerful ally in Daemon, Myr began to rally forces on the mainland, hiring the Golden Company, exiled men of Westeros, and other Sellsword bands. Tensions simmered in Lys as well, though they bided their time. Bravos watched from afar, considering how best to profit from the chaos. King Viserys' envoys came and went without success. Some never returned, lost at sea or disappeared in Daemon's domain. Others brought back Daemon's scornful messages, proclaiming the independence of his kingdom and warning Westeros to stay out if they had any sense. Upon hearing these replies, Ser Otto Hightower pressed Viserys again and again to quell this rebellion. "It is no mere rebellion now," Otto intoned. "It is a new kingdom, recognized by some of the free cities. If we permit it to stand, who will next claim themselves a king? The Lord of the Trident? The Warden of the North? We must not let the dragons fight amongst themselves, or the realm shall bleed." However, Viserys was still reluctant to commit to a long war far from the mainlands. He ordered the royal fleet to patrol the gullet and protect trade from Dragonstone to King's Landing, but he stopped short of launching an invasion. Amidst this standoff, Rhaenyra took to the skies on her dragon Syrax, circling above King's Landing. She felt torn. Part of her wished to fly to the Stepstones and speak to Daemon herself, to understand why he had gone to such extremes. Yet she knew her father would never permit it openly, nor would the court look kindly on the princess meeting with the rogue prince. So the tension continued to mount. Swords sharpened, ships built. Lords in the Reach and the Stormlands bickered over whether to join a potential royal campaign or wait. The Tullus and the Arryns watched from the relative calm of their lands, uncertain how they might be drawn into conflict. The Lannisters in the west prepared their own fleets. House Hightower in Old Town shored up its walls and prayed war would not come to them. Then the Stepstones flared again. Myrish forces, funded partially by Lys in secret, struck two islands simultaneously, attacking Daemon's outposts. For a moment, it appeared Daemon might be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But the prince had prepared for such an onslaught. In a night of cunning tactics, his captains ambushed the Myrish fleet, drawing them into shallow waters where they found themselves trapped against reefs. At dawn, Caraxes descended in a storm of fire, turning the Myrish ships into blazing pyres. The sea churned red with blood. Myrish foot soldiers, stranded ashore, were cut down by Daemon's men. When news of this resounding victory reached the free cities, it caused a stir. Tyrosh grew more confident in its subtle alliance with Daemon. Pentos began to consider offering funds as well, seeing an opportunity to pit Myr and Lys against each other with Daemon's help. Bravos, ever cautious, remained tight-lipped, though it was rumored Bravosi coin flowed into Daemon's coffers in exchange for certain trade guarantees. Back in King's Landing, the small council could no longer deny the truth. Daemon Targaryen was not only holding the Stepstones, he was thriving. The unspoken fear among them was that his seat of power might inspire rebellious thoughts in the lords of Westeros who resented King Viserys' gentle style or who wanted more dynamic leadership. Some even whispered that if Daemon was recognized as king by enough foreign powers, he might attempt to land in Westeros itself, seeking to carve away certain territories. Viserys refused to believe his brother would launch a full-scale invasion of Westeros. But he recognized Daemon's cunning, and he understood the danger that could arise if more Myrish or Lyseni aggression forced Daemon to respond with even more brutality. The realm's trade was at stake, along with the political standing of House Targaryen. Time was running out for a peaceful solution, so the king made a choice, one that would ignite new flames across the realm. He dispatched a fleet, half the strength of the crown's navy, toward the Stepstones under the command of Lord Corlys Velaryon. Their orders were to blockade Daemon's domain until he yielded. No invasion, not yet, but a blockade that would prevent vital goods from reaching Daemon's forces. Viserys hoped to starve Daemon into surrender or negotiation. The day the Velaryon fleet set sail from Driftmark, watchers along the coast of Blackwater Bay marveled at the sight. War galleys, swift corsairs, tall carracks, all bearing the proud silver seahorse of House Velaryon. Lord Corlys, the sea snake himself, stood at the helm of the lead ship, a glimmer in his eyes that mixed duty with regret. He had known Daemon well, fought beside him, bled beside him. Now he was tasked with containing him. Daemon watched their arrival from a high crag on Bloodstone, the largest of the Stepstones. The sea glistened with the lights of the enemy fleet. He recognized the banners of Velaryon, and he felt a bitter twist in his gut. So his old comrade came to unseat him? Daemon smirked to mask the sting of betrayal. This was war, and war demanded sacrifices. He mounted Caraxes and soared out over the waves. The Velaryon fleet held formation. Its men braced for a possible dragon assault. Daemon considered unleashing Caraxes' fury then and there. The idea of seeing Corlys' proud ships set aflame was tempting. But he knew Corlys' skill at sea, knew the defenses the man would have prepared. A direct attack might cost Caraxes dearly. Daemon turned and flew back to the island, deciding to probe the blockade in smaller raids, testing for weaknesses. For weeks, the blockade held. Daemon's cell's words began to grumble as rations dwindled. Many of their supplies had come from the mainland or nearby island routes now cut off by the Velaryon fleet. Daemon tried to strike at the blockade with swift, brutal ambushes, but Corlys was cunning and had arranged his ships in layered formations. Caraxes burned a few vessels, but the blockade continued. Desperate for relief, Daemon doubled his efforts to court allies from the free cities. Tyrosh responded by sending a squadron of war galleys under a flamboyant captain known as Rodrio the Peacock, whose sails were dyed in riotous blues and greens. The Tyroshi squadron engaged the Velaryon ships in a daring skirmish, nearly breaking the line. Corlys had to scramble to repel them, eventually driving the Tyroshi back with heavy losses on both sides. But the show of force only intensified the conflict. Now it was not just Daemon and Westeros. Foreign powers were actively involved, drawn by promise of gold or fear of their rival cities gaining advantage. The Stepstones had become a tinderbox, with Daemon's crown at its center. King Viserys, upon receiving word of the blockade's partial breach by Tyrosh, felt a creeping dread. This was no small tussle now. It had become a multi-front war in all but name. Myr was still furious after its defeat, Lys quietly funded corsairs. Tyrosh openly supported Daemon, and Westeros was trying to choke him out. The lords of the small council urged the king to fully commit the royal forces, to root out Daemon before the situation spiraled further. But Viserys hesitated. How many lives would that cost? How many dragons? He thought of the Targaryen words, fire and blood. That was what they brought to any conflict. Did he really want to see the seas ablaze with Targaryen might? Was there no other way? As the weeks wore on, Rhaenyra grew restless. She took to flying Syrax farther from King's Landing, always under watchful eyes, but she felt the need to do something. One day, without her father's blessing, she soared south, crossing the Blackwater Bay, heading toward the shipping lanes that led to the Stepstones. The wind screamed around her, her silver braid whipping in the gale. Syrax roared, exulting in freedom. Below, fishing boats scattered like startled minnows at the sight of the golden dragon passing overhead. She did not go so far as to reach the blockade. Instead, she landed on Driftmark, seat of House Velaryon, to speak with Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, and Lord Corlys' wife. Rhaenys had once been denied the crown in favor of Rhaenyra's father, and so she understood something of Targaryen ambitions. Rhaenyra hoped Rhaenys might intercede with Corlys, persuading him to find a path that did not require Daemon's utter destruction. In the stone halls of High Tide, the current Velaryon stronghold, the two Targaryen women spoke quietly. Rhaenys, regal and composed, listened to Rhaenyra's pleas. "I would have peace," Rhaenyra said. "Daemon may be a scoundrel and a rogue, but he is still of our blood, and I fear for what this war might do to House Targaryen if it spreads further." Rhaenys' dark eyes held a distant sorrow. "It may be too late to simply turn back, child. Daemon has crowned himself king. Viserys cannot ignore that. Corlys has sworn his ships to uphold the king's command. You know how proud my lord husband is. He will not retreat while ordered to maintain the blockade." Rhaenyra looked away, vexed. Is there no way to speak sense to Daemon? Could he not yield? Surely he knows he stands alone against the might of the Iron Throne. Rhaenys let out a soft, humorless laugh. Daemon stands alone? He stands with a dragon, and perhaps a handful of free cities that find him useful. He would never yield. His pride is greater than the Stepstones themselves. Corlys believes if we starve him out, Daemon might be forced to the table. Yet I wonder if your uncle would rather burn than bend. Their conversation yielded little, but it gave Rhaenyra a deeper understanding of how entrenched each side was. She left High Tide with a heavy heart, returning to King's Landing to find her father exhausted and ill-tempered from the barrage of letters demanding action or caution. Meanwhile, in the Stepstones, Daemon found himself at the heart of a precarious spider's web. Myr threatened to send a new armada at any moment. Lys funded raiders to test his defenses. Tyrosh offered help, but only so far as it gave them an edge against Myr and Lys. The Velaryon blockade loomed like a noose around his neck, cutting off supplies and threatening to tighten day by day. But Daemon thrived in chaos. He personally led nightly raids in swift longboats, slipping past the blockade to strike at unsuspecting ships or cargo vessels. Darkness was his ally. When dawn broke, Carax's sword, a crimson terror among the clouds. Sporadic battles dotted the waves, each new victory or loss shifting the fragile balance of power. Sometimes Daemon had the upper hand, sometimes Corlys' blockade inflicted painful wounds. The Cell's words under Daemon's banner began to fracture along lines of loyalty and greed. Some demanded better pay or threatened desertion. The cunning prince used gifts from Tyrosh and coin from Bravos to buy their continued service, but he knew that Cell's words were fickle. If ever he showed weakness, they would abandon him. That knowledge pushed him to fight all the harder, to appear invincible. Late one night, Daemon walked the beaches of Bloodstone in the orange glow of torches. A small cove sheltered a few fishing boats, humble craft that risked running the blockade to bring in meager hauls. The sand crunched beneath his boots as he gazed into the black waters. He had dismissed his usual retinue, preferring solitude, though a silent squire followed at a respectful distance. The constant threat weighed on him, but he refused to show it. The Stepstones were his, and he would see them remain so. He lifted Dark Sister, allowing the moonlight to run along its blade. The sword was older than House Targaryen's conquest of Westeros, a piece of Valyrian heritage that seemed to hum with potential in his grip. He thought of Viserys, gentle and warm, but incompetent in Daemon's eyes. He thought of Rhaenyra, the niece he had once doted upon. Did she think him a fool now? Or did she understand that the kingdom needed steel, not softness, at its helm? If he succeeded here, no, when he succeeded, perhaps the realm would finally realize he was worthy of leading. In the darkest corners of his mind, a half-formed idea floated, establishing his power so firmly that one day, if Viserys' rule faltered, the lords of Westeros might look to Daemon Targaryen, king of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, as a savior. Lost in such musings, he nearly missed the faint glow on the horizon. Fire on the water. Daemon's eyes narrowed. Another skirmish? He strode swiftly down the beach, summoning a handful of men, and ordered them to follow. By the time they brought small boats around to investigate, the glow had intensified, painting the night sky in flickering orange. It was a Lyseni raiding party, come to test the defenses of a smaller islet in Daemon's domain. They had attacked with cunning, hoping to seize stockpiles of food. But Daemon and his men rode out under cover of darkness, using the rocky shoals to approach unseen. Then Daemon summoned Caraxes with a shrill horn blast. The blood WRM burst from the gloom, roaring fury, and unleashed a stream of fire that turned the Lyseni ships into floating infernos. Daemon himself leapt ashore amid the chaos, Dark Sister flashing. The Lyseni troops, demoralized by dragonfire, tried to flee. Some scrambled back to their boats, only to find them ablaze. Others attempted to hide in the rocky crags. Daemon led his men in a savage dance of steel, cutting down stragglers. The stench of burning pitch and flesh filled the night air. The cove lit up as if it were day under the molten glow of flames. When the last screams faded, Daemon stood drenched in sweat and gore, chest heaving. Another victory, but such victories came at cost. Each fight chipped away at his resources, forced him to bleed men and supplies. The Lyseni, Myrish, and Westerosi blockade formed a relentless grindstone. No matter how often he triumphed, a new challenge emerged. War, Daemon realized, was not a single glorious battle. It was an endless chain of hardships, wearing all parties down until someone broke. He refused to be the one who broke. In King's Landing, the atmosphere turned tense. Rumors abounded that Daemon's scouts had been spotted near the Crown's own waters, that Caraxes might strike at the royal fleet moored in the Blackwater. Lords whispered that the free folk of King's Landing quietly cheered Daemon's exploits, seeing in him a champion who defied the complacent monarchy. Others murmured of the horrors that Targaryen dragons could unleash if the civil strife escalated. Memories of the Field of Fire, Balerion the Black Dread, and the devastation of Harrenhal lingered in the collective consciousness. Ser Otto Hightower demanded the king clamp down on dissent. King Viserys, worn by the pressure, did so reluctantly, stationing more gold cloaks about the city. He also sent word to Rhaenyra to remain within the Red Keep. She chafed at the order but obeyed. The realm felt as though it stood on a knife's edge, awaiting news that would tip it into war's full fury. And then that news arrived. Myr, reeling from repeated losses, decided to strike a deal with House Hightower, forging a secret agreement to open Myrish trade through Old Town's ports if they helped remove Daemon from the Stepstones. At the same time, Lys hammered out its own arrangement with House Lannister, eyeing joint commercial ventures once the Stepstones were no longer under Daemon's control. Tyrosh, learning of these maneuvers, ramped up its support for Daemon, sending more ships and even a small contingent of mercenaries. The Free Cities had turned the Stepstones into a proxy battleground for their rivalries, and Westeros's lords, guided by competing ambitions, found themselves entangled as well. Suddenly, the Seven Kingdoms were divided over how to handle Daemon. Some believed the war was an opportunity to further their own wealth. Others believed it was a disaster in the making. The Stormlands, traditionally eager for martial glory, offered to lead a royal host by land to Dorne, from where they might launch an assault on the Stepstones. But Dorne was not part of the realm proper yet, and the Dornish had no love for Targaryens. They might side with Daemon if they saw advantage in it, or remain neutral and let the realm tear itself apart. Just as King Viserys began to weigh sending an embassy to Dorne, chaos erupted on yet another front. The Ironborn, under their new Lord Reaper of Pike, decided the realm's attention was fixed on the Stepstones. Sensing opportunity, they launched raids along the western coast of Westeros. Coastal villages burned, fishing boats vanished, and the Lannisters were forced to recall some of their ships to defend their shores. House Hightower likewise faced the threat that the Ironborn might sail around to the south. Suddenly, the realm was fighting battles on multiple fronts, or at least preparing to. Daemon's Stepstone conflict, the Ironborn raids, the swirl of alliances among the free cities, and the tension in King's Landing left King Viserys feeling besieged. This was exactly what he had hoped to avoid throughout his reign. He was a peacemaker, not a conqueror. Yet his brother's actions had cracked the foundation of that peace. The small council erupted into furious debate day after day. Some urged the king to make a swift example of the Ironborn. Others insisted that the Stepstones remain the priority. Ser Otto repeated calls for a decisive strike against Daemon, to crush him before he grew even stronger. Lord Beesbury pointed to the financial strain. The Master of Laws bemoaned the possibility of widespread uprisings. Each voice clamored for attention, but Viserys seemed paralyzed, unable to choose which threat demanded immediate wrath. Sensing the king's indecision, nobles across the realm began making their own moves. The Baratheons started massing men near the Storm's End docks. The Tyrells quietly fortified Highgarden. Lord Blackwood and Lord Bracken bickered on the Trident, each mustering their small forces, uncertain whether to march south or remain in place. The Riverlands churned with rumor, the Vale looked inward, and the north, under Lord Stark, remained distant, focusing on its own stability. At the heart of it all was Daemon Targaryen, perched on his chain of islands, wearing a makeshift golden crown, fighting a cunning dance of raids and alliances. He knew well how to stoke the fires of discontent in Westeros, sending secret letters to lords who felt slighted by King Viserys, promising them opportunities if they recognized his dominion. Some might scoff at his ambition, but Daemon possessed a dangerous charisma and the advantage of unpredictability. The letters he received in return hinted at cracks within the realm. A minor lord from the Stormlands complained bitterly of being ignored by the king, expressing an openness to new leadership. A knight from the Reach claimed he served House Tyrell but hated their subservience to the crown, hinting that he might rally men to Daemon's cause if properly rewarded. Perhaps these were empty boasts, or perhaps they were seeds waiting to be watered. Daemon kept them all in mind. In the midst of this swirling conflict, the possibility of dragons facing dragons loomed. If the Stepstones crisis escalated, would Viserys order Rhaenyra or the other Targaryen dragon riders to engage Daemon in aerial combat? The mere thought was enough to give many courtiers nightmares. Fire and blood, indeed. Yet for all the tension, no single event had yet sparked the true conflagration. The Stepstones' front was brutal but mostly contained. The Ironborn raids were savage but localized. The alliances among the free cities simmered more than exploded. It was a precarious balance, as if the Seven Kingdoms and Essos both hung upon the edge of a sword, waiting for a final impetus to tip them into open war. That impetus arrived late in the year, when Myr and Lys, weary of Tyrash's advantage, joined their fleets for a massive assault on the Stepstones. They reasoned that if they shattered Daemon once and for all, Tyrosh would lose its greatest ally in the region, and thus the next power struggle could be settled on more favorable terms. It was a cynical calculation typical of the free cities. Each believed they could pull back at the last moment, once Daemon was dethroned. Thousands of Sellswords boarded the combined Myrish-Lyseni ships. Skilled archers, infantry, and even a few war elephants intended for siege warfare were loaded in an unprecedented show of force. The fleets gathered near the coast of Lys, sails a riot of shapes and colors. Daemon's spies, some Braavosi, some Tyroshi, sent urgent word that a great storm of war was coming his way. Corlys Velaryon, commanding the king's blockade, also learned of the threat. He was forced to decide if he should stand aside and let Myr and Lys do his work for him, removing Daemon from the Stepstones, or if he should intervene to prevent a foreign power from taking control of the region. The king's orders were only to blockade, but if Myr and Lys established a beachhead, they could claim the Stepstones for themselves. That would be a worse outcome for Westeros than Daemon's rule. The sea churned with possibilities. Rhaenyra, safe in King's Landing, felt dread coil in her belly as she heard rumor after rumor. If Daemon fell, the realm might still erupt in chaos. If Daemon prevailed, he might stand stronger than ever. Finally, the Myrish-Lyseni alliance set sail, an armada that dwarfed anything the Stepstones had seen in living memory. Over 100 ships, some brimming with mercenary forces. The plan was to strike at multiple islands at once, overwhelming Daemon's scattered outposts and forcing him to spread Caraxes thin. Then, once the prince was pinned, they would close in, capturing or killing him. But word reached Tyrosh, which sent its own fleet to intercept. Suddenly, the waters between Lys and the Stepstones were clogged with warships. The Valerian blockade watched from a distance, uncertain whether to join the fray. Daemon prepared feverishly. He recalled every man he could from the smaller islets, consolidating his strength. He urged the Sellswords who might waver to stay true under promise of unimaginable loot if they repelled this invasion. Dark Sister was never far from his side. Then, one gray morning as a cold wind whipped across the sea, the Myrish-Lyseni fleet bore down upon the Stepstones. Caraxes took flight, blood-red wings spread wide against the stormy sky. Daemon soared above his domain, scanning the horizon. There, in the distance, sails, so many sails that they looked like a forest of masts. War drums pounded across the waves, and the men in Daemon's strongholds trembled at the sight of such a force. But Daemon would not yield. He was a dragon rider, a prince of the blood, a self-crowned king. As the Myrish-Lyseni ships drew near, the Tyroshi fleet lunged from the north, slamming into their flanks. Smoke and splintered wood rose in all directions. Men shouted and screamed, drowned by the pounding surf and the roar of war horns. Then Daemon descended, Caraxes unleashing dragonfire upon the main line of war galleys. Chaos reigned. Cogs and galleys burned, smoke billowed, and the ocean frothed with debris and corpses. The Myrish and Lyseni, though they had vast numbers, found themselves attacked from two sides, dragon above, Tyrosh by sea. Yet they fought fiercely. Their archers filled the sky with black-fletched arrows, some finding their mark in Caraxes' scales, causing the dragon to shriek in pain. Daemon perch. Ed in his saddle felt the jolt of impact, but he spurred Caraxes on, raining more fire upon the largest vessels. Below the swirling chaos, hidden from the dragon's vantage, dozens of small landing craft slipped away from the main battle, aiming for the beaches of Bloodstone. Mercenaries from Myr, under the banner of a hawk in flight, disembarked amidst the surf, while Lyseni infantry armed with short swords scrambled up the rocky shore. Sellsword captains barked orders, forming ragged battle lines. Their plan was to seize the fortress that Daemon had claimed as his capital, forcing him to the ground to defend it. The defenders of Bloodstone, outnumbered and battered by the blockade, now faced an onslaught. They fought with desperation, the black and red dragon banners waving amidst the haze of battle. Word of the assault spread, and Daemon landed Caraxes outside the fortress, letting the dragon tear into the invaders with tooth and claw. Boulders catapulted from improvised siege engines crashed against stone walls. Men died by the score. In that swirling melee, Daemon waded into the fray with Dark Sister. His presence electrified his troops. Sellswords who might have broken instead rallied to his side, chanting his name. Blood splattered the beach, turning the shallows a murky red. Daemon moved like a demon of old Valyria, graceful and lethal. One by one, Myrish captains fell beneath his blade. At times, it seemed as though no mortal could stand before his fury. Yet the enemy was vast, and exhaustion gnawed at Daemon's men. The fortress walls were compromised, black smoke pouring from the upper ramparts. Overhead, Caraxes roared, pinned down by volley after volley of arrows and scorpions. The Tyroshi fleet was locked in a savage struggle with the main Myrish Lyseni force out at sea, unable to spare reinforcements for the fortress. If Daemon were to fall, it would happen here, in the thick of the fight, with no relief from Westeros or any ally. Far away, on the deck of the flagship leading the Valerian blockade, Lord Corlys watched the towering columns of smoke rising from Bloodstone. Duty clashed with loyalty in his heart. He had come to blockade Daemon, not to let foreign powers seize the Stepstones. But King Viserys had given no explicit order to intervene if Myr and Lys attacked. The sea snake grimaced. If the Myrish and Lyseni triumphed, Westeros's shipping lanes would be at their mercy. Corlys might be blamed for allowing it to happen. He made his decision. With a sharp command, he ordered his fleet to set sail and enter the fray, but not on Myr or Lys's side, on Westeros's terms. Trumpets blared, sails were hoisted, and the Valerian ships cut through the waves toward Bloodstone. King Viserys had not authorized a full war, but the Master of Ships had the authority to protect the realm's interests. Right now, that meant preventing foreign dominance of the Stepstones, even if it meant aiding Daemon. And so the final confrontation began to take shape. Daemon's battered forces and the Tyroshi allies on one side, Myr and Lys's combined might on the other, with House Valerion sailing in to tip the balance or perhaps claim the Stepstones for the crown. Dozens of ships converged around the smoldering island. Swords flashed, war cries mingled with the crash of waves, and dragons roared overhead. In King's Landing, ravens flooded the Red Keep. Messengers brought frantic reports of the battle. King Viserys, head in his hands, knew that the realm had slipped into a war he could no longer contain. When one messenger babbled that Corlys Valerion had joined the fight, the king slammed a hand upon the arm of the Iron Throne in anger and despair, cutting his palm on a blade. The throne seemed to remind him that Targaryen rule was bought with blood. He ordered the remainder of the royal fleet to sail at once, with instructions to bring peace if possible, but the time for peace had likely passed. War was upon them, a war Daemon Targaryen had set in motion the day he crowned himself king of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. Now the realm held its breath, for dragons and men clashed in a vicious struggle that threatened to embroil all of Westeros and beyond. Smoke and flame, steel and salt, pride and ambition. These forces collided on that rocky archipelago, forging a new destiny under the shadow of House Targaryen's might. Bloodstone's beaches ran red, and the outcome would ripple across kingdoms, binding or breaking them for years to come. And Daemon Targaryen, locked in mortal combat against foes from every side, found himself at the center of a storm he had helped create, determined that if this was to be his end, he would die as a dragon, not as some cur chained by caution. The Stepstones would either be his stepping stone to glory or his watery grave. Yet the gods flip the coins of fate, and in war nothing is ever certain. So the fighting surged on, as swirling as the tides, shaping legends yet unwritten and forging the future of House Targaryen in the crucible of steel and flame.